My name is Daniel Walsh. I'm 35, and at my family's Easter dinner, my own sister mocked me for not understanding real tech moments before my grandmother revealed that my company was in the process of buying her real tech company for $42 million. Before I tell you about the silence that followed, a silence so heavy it felt like you could break a tooth on it, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It all came to a head on Easter Sunday, one of those perfect spring days in Denver where the sun is bright but the air still has a bite to it. My grandmother, Edna, loves hosting. Her house smells like roasted chicken, old books, and the faint, sweet scent of the rose bushes she's tended for 50 years. It's the kind of smell that's supposed to mean comfort, safety. For me, it had always been the smell of an arena just before the fight. My sister, Gabrielle, 4 years older and a lifetime ahead in our family's eyes, had just flown in from San Francisco. She walked in not like she was coming home, but like a CEO visiting a regional office. She brought a bottle of Napa Valley wine that probably cost more than my electricity bill and placed it on the counter with a thud that said, "I have arrived." I was in the kitchen, pulling the roasted chicken out of the oven. This is what I do. Gabrielle builds empires. I cook the holiday meals. It's been the unspoken arrangement for as long as I can remember. "Smells great, Danny," she said, not looking at me but at her phone. "Still playing with your spices, I see." I just grunted in response. There was no point. The dinner conversation was, as always, the Gabrielle show. She talked about AI, about machine learning, about disrupting paradigms. She used a lot of words that made my parents, Thomas and Margaret, nod with a kind of blind, beaming pride. My father, a retired engineering professor, would hang on her every technical term, even though I knew for a fact he had to call me last week to figure out how to reset his Wi-Fi router. The topic turned to her company, Bitewave Labs. "We're on the verge of a major breakthrough," she announced, swirling her obscenely expensive wine. "It's a strategic pivot. Highly confidential, of course. Northbridge Systems is sniffing around. They know we're the future." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Northbridge Systems. That's my company. I'm the director of strategic acquisitions. The one who does the sniffing." My mom, bless her heart, turned to me. "Oh, that's where you work, isn't it, Daniel? How nice. Maybe you'll get to see your sister around the office." Before I could form a single, non-lethal sentence, Gabrielle laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was sharp and dismissive. "Mom, Daniel's in, what is it? Business administration? He wouldn't be in the meetings. Real tech needs real brains. No offense, Danny." The no offense was the part that always got me. It's the little pat on the head after the slap in the face. I looked down at my plate, at the perfectly cooked chicken I had spent hours on. I could feel the familiar heat rising in my neck. Decades of this. Decades of being the background character in my own family's story. I was about to just let it go, to swallow it down with a mouthful of mashed potatoes like I always did. But then, a new voice cut through the air. It was calm, cool, and precise. It was my grandmother, Edna, who had been quietly observing the entire performance, set her fork down gently. She looked at Gabrielle. Her eyes, usually warm, were now as sharp as chips of ice. "Gabrielle," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "You talk about real brains, but I hear Bitewave is having to sell itself to survive. What kind of brains does that take?" The air went still. Gabrielle's smile froze on her face. My father started to say something, to defend his golden child, but Edna wasn't finished. She turned her gaze to me, and for the first time that night, I felt like someone actually saw me. The silence hung there, thick and suffocating. It was the silence of a truth that had been buried for 30 years and was just now clawing its way to the surface. And in that moment I knew. The carefully constructed world of the Walsh family was about to shatter. To truly understand the weight of that Easter silence, you have to understand it wasn't created in a moment. It was built over 30 years, brick by brick, comment by comment, until it was a wall between my sister and me, and a cage around me. My life has always felt like it was lived in the margins of her story. I have this one memory, so vivid it's practically burned into my brain. I'm 10 years old, and we're in the basement of our house in Ann Arbor. The air is thick with the smell of damp concrete, sawdust, and the faint electric tang of ozone from my dad's electronics workbench. It's a Saturday afternoon. I'm at a wobbly card table my mom set up for me under the weak light of a single bare bulb. In front of me is a pristine notebook for the new school year. I'm not just writing my name on it. I'm creating a masterpiece. I have a set of freshly sharpened colored pencils, a plastic ruler, and a compass my dad had grudgingly let me borrow. I'm drawing this elaborate, symmetrical crest, a shield with my initials intertwined, surrounded by geometric patterns. It's precise, it's organized, it's creative. I'm completely absorbed. I'm proud of it. Across the room, there's another world. Gabrielle, 14, is the center of it. She's sitting on a high stool at the main workbench, bathed in the focused glow of a fluorescent lamp. Before her is a chaotic-looking explosion of wires, green circuit boards, and the beige metal shell of what would one day become a computer. My father, Thomas, is leaning over her shoulder. His expression a mixture of awe and intense concentration I had never seen directed at me. The 8088 processor goes in here, he's saying, pointing with a pair of tweezers. Be careful not to bend the pins. Each one has a purpose. I know, Dad, Gabrielle says, her voice dripping with the effortless confidence of a teenager who has never known doubt. She picks up the delicate chip and, with a steady hand, presses it into the socket. It makes a satisfying click. My mother's voice floats down the wooden stairs. Thomas? What are you two up to down there? My dad straightens up, his chest puffed out. He doesn't even turn to look at her. He beams at Gabrielle. She did it, Margaret. She seeded the processor. The girl actually built a computer from a kit. He puts a heavy, proud hand on Gabrielle's shoulder. Then, as if remembering I exist, his eyes flick over to my little card table. He squints at my colorful, meticulous drawing. This, Daniel, he says, his voice booming in the small basement, gesturing from my notebook to Gabrielle's machine. This is the future. That's just decoration. Remember that. Decoration. The word landed like a stone in my gut. I looked at my beautiful crest, at the sharp lines and vibrant colors. A moment ago, it was a source of pride. Now it just felt silly, frivolous. I slowly, quietly, closed the cover of the notebook and pushed it to the corner of the table. That was the day the lesson truly sank in. Gabrielle was the architect of the future. I was the interior decorator. This wasn't a one-time event. It was the operating system of our family. It ran in the background of every holiday, every phone call, every decision. Years later, when I was a junior at the University of Michigan, I busted my ass to get a highly competitive summer internship at a top financial firm in Chicago. It was my shot, my entry into the world I wanted to be a part of. After 3 rounds of interviews, I got the offer letter. I felt like I was floating. I ran back to my dorm room and called home, my voice buzzing with an energy I couldn't contain. Mom, Dad, you're not going to believe it. I got the internship at Sterling Cooper. Oh, Daniel, that's great, honey, my mother said. Her voice was warm, but I could hear the distraction in it, the sound of the TV playing in the living room. That's just wonderful. We're very proud. There was a beat of silence. I waited for the follow-up questions. What will you be doing? Is the pay good? Are you excited? They never came. Instead, my mother said, So, listen, I was just on the phone with Gabrielle. You won't believe what she's doing. She's starting a new club at Stanford, a computer science mentorship program for undergraduate women. Isn't that just incredible? She's only a sophomore and she's already a leader, a real trailblazer. She's even designing an app to help with scheduling. What do you think of that, Thomas? I could hear my father's muffled voice in the background, singing her praises. The elation drained out of me as if a plug had been pulled. My internship, the biggest achievement of my life to date, had just been completely and utterly eclipsed. It wasn't even a contest. Wow, I managed to say, my throat suddenly tight. That's amazing, isn't it? My mother chirped, oblivious. Anyway, honey, That's great news about your thing. We've got to run. Talk to you soon. The line went dead. I stood there in my dorm room, the city lights of an arbor twinkling outside my window, and I felt a profound sense of invisibility. It was a cold, lonely feeling. It wasn't that they were cruel. It was worse. It was that my accomplishments simply didn't register on the same scale as hers. The only person who ever seemed to operate on a different frequency was my grandmother. Edna, a woman who had taught advanced calculus to rooms full of skeptical young men in the 1970s, had no patience for nonsense. She saw things for what they were. She'd call me on random Tuesday afternoons. "Daniel, Edna here." She'd say, no preamble. "Northbridge stock closed up 2.25. I read about that logistics company you acquired last quarter. Looks like your synergy models were accurate. Explain to me how you handled the cultural integration." That's where these things always fall apart. And I would. For half an hour, I'd talk to her about hostile takeovers, asset valuation, and the complex human calculus of merging two corporate families. She understood it. She saw my work not as paperwork or decoration, but as a high-stakes game of three-dimensional chess. She was the only one who got it. My girlfriend, Rebecca, got it too, but from a different angle. As a pediatric surgeon, her world is defined by brutal, tangible reality. Competence is life or death. Image is meaningless. After one particularly infuriating family video call, where Gabrielle had spent 10 minutes mocking my job title, I was pacing in our living room, fuming. Rebecca listened patiently, her arms crossed. When I finally ran out of steam, she said, "Okay, let me ask you a question. If you needed emergency surgery, would you want the surgeon who gives the best speeches at medical conferences, or the one with the steadiest hands and the highest success rate?" "The one with the best hands, obviously." "Exactly," she said, her gaze steady. "You have the best hands in your field, Daniel. You know it. Your boss knows it. Your team knows it. So why are you letting your sense of worth be determined by a panel of unqualified judges who are emotionally compromised?" She was a surgeon, all right. She had just sliced away the tumor of my resentment and exposed the raw, simple truth beneath it. Intellectually, I knew she was right, but this was family. That deep, primal need for their approval, a need forged in 1,000 childhood moments, was a ghost I couldn't seem to exorcise. My best friend at work, Jason Patel, our VP of Market Research, was less delicate. "Dude, your family's toxic," he said over beers one night. "Your sister is a classic narcissist, and your parents are textbook enablers. You need to set some boundaries or you're going to be miserable forever." "It's complicated," I'd always reply, because it was. So I focused on my world. My apartment, my team, my track record. I had a life that was objectively successful. I was good at my job. I was respected by my peers. I was happy. But then, inevitably, a holiday would loom. A family video call would be scheduled, and the ghost would return. That's why, about a month before that Easter, I started noticing things. Little whispers from my contacts in the venture capital world. Jason would send me cryptic notes. Hearing a lot of nervousness in the AI space. A lot of smoke, no fire. I saw an interview with a prominent Silicon Valley investor who warned about pet projects, disguised as companies, run by founders who were brilliant at coding but clueless about business. He called them zombie companies, technically alive but with no pulse. Every warning, every red flag, seemed to point in the direction of San Francisco, in the direction of Bitewave Labs. Then came the final clue. A short, brutal scene I witnessed over FaceTime. Gabrielle had called, wanting to show off some new smart home gadget. In the background, I could hear my 5-year-old niece, Lily, asking her mom, Gabrielle's wife Heather, a simple question. "Mommy, why was that man so angry on the phone before?" I saw Gabrielle's face freeze for a split second. She quickly swiveled the camera away. "Oh, Lily, that was just a silly business call. Everything's fine," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud. Heather appeared in the background, her face pale and strained, and quickly scooped the child up, disappearing from the frame. The mask had slipped. It was only for a second, but I saw it. The pure, unadulterated panic. I knew then. It wasn't just industry gossip. It was real. The golden child, the family's future, was in serious, serious trouble. And she was hiding it from everyone. The pressure cooker was hissing. I just didn't realize that I was the one who was about to be handed the key to either turn down the heat or make it explode. The email that blew my world off its axis arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. It came from my boss, Monica Reyes, a senior VP who had clawed her way up from the corporate law department and possessed a legendary intolerance for bullshit. The subject line was typically stark: confidential, Project Nightingale. The body of the email was even sparser. Daniel, see attached. Potential acquisition target. High priority. Moving fast. Need your preliminary strategic assessment by end of day Friday. This is Tier 1 confidential. Eyes only. My heart rate picked up a little. High priority from Monica meant a deal that was already in motion. Something the board was watching closely. I opened the encrypted attachment, a 40-page dossier compiled by our market intelligence team. The first page was the executive summary. Project code name, Nightingale. Target sector, AI/machine vision. Target company. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning past the charts and graphs. And then I saw it. Target company. Bitewave Labs Incorporated. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was like the text on the screen was physically pushing the air out of my lungs. I read it again, then a third time, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. They weren't. This wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't a friend's cryptic warning. This was a formal, Northbridge-stamped dossier, and it was a clinical, brutal autopsy of a company in its death throes. I scrolled through the pages, a feeling of cold dread seeping into my bones. The numbers were catastrophic. Burn rate, over $1 million a month. Current cash on hand, enough for maybe 5 more months if they were lucky. Revenue, negligible. They had a single, potentially brilliant piece of technology, a proprietary computer vision model for industrial drone navigation, but it was buried under a mountain of debt and staggering mismanagement. The report detailed a history of missed deadlines, 2 failed product pivots, and a dangerously high rate of employee turnover in the sales and marketing departments. It was a classic Silicon Valley story. A founder who was a genius in a lab but a child in a boardroom. It was my sister's story, laid bare in the cold, unforgiving language of a balance sheet. My first coherent thought wasn't as a brother. It was as a professional. This was a 5-alarm fire of a conflict of interest. Every second I sat with this information without disclosing it, I was compromising myself and my company. I stood up from my desk, leaving the dossier open on my screen, and walked the long hallway to the executive floor. My mind was a whirlwind. What were the ethics here? What was my legal obligation? What the hell was I supposed to do? Monica's office was on the corner, a glass-walled cage with a view that stretched all the way to the mountains. She was on a conference call, her face set in its usual expression of intense focus. She saw me standing in her doorway, saw the look on my face, and immediately held up a finger to her call. "I'll have to call you back," she said into her headset, and disconnected. "What's happened, Daniel?" she asked, her eyes already scanning me for information. "Don't tell me Nightingale's got another bidder." I closed the heavy glass door behind me, the click echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "Monica," I said, my voice coming out tighter than I intended. "It's about Project Nightingale. I have a conflict of interest." She leaned forward slightly. "How so?" "The founder and CEO of Bitewave Labs," I said, forcing the words out. "Gabrielle Walsh. She's my sister." Monica's face remained perfectly neutral, a skill she had perfected over years of high-stakes negotiations. But I saw her posture shift. I saw her sit back in her expensive leather chair, her fingers steepling in front of her. She was no longer a manager talking to a subordinate. She was a lawyer assessing a threat. "I see," she said, her voice low and even. She let the silence stretch, evaluating me, evaluating the situation. "Thank you for your immediate disclosure. That was the correct first move. I have to recuse myself entirely," I stated, the words tasting like ash. I can't be involved in any capacity. It's the only way. To step away from a deal this big was a blow to my career, but the alternative was unthinkable. She was silent for a full minute, her gaze fixed on me, unblinking. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock on her wall. "No," she said finally. The single word hit me like a physical blow. "What?" I stammered. "Monica, I can't. Ethically, legally. If this ever came out, it could look like I was trying to improperly influence the deal to help my family. Could jeopardize the entire acquisition. It could get us both fired and possibly sued. Which is why you will not be leading it," she countered, her voice sharp and decisive now. She was back in command. "You will have no contact with the seller. You will not be in any negotiation meetings. You will not speak to any member of their team. I'm assigning Nate Johnson to lead the formal negotiations. He will be the public face of this deal." She paused, leaning forward again, her eyes boring into mine. "But I am not taking my best strategist off the board. You, Daniel, are going to be my ghost, my backroom analyst. You know this technology, you know this sector, and more importantly, you know the CEO. You know how she thinks. You know her vanities, her blind spots." She was offering me an impossible task, to architect the acquisition of my own sister's company, from the shadows, while maintaining perfect, unbiased objectivity. It was a tightrope walk over the Grand Canyon with no safety net. "Your job," she laid out, her tone leaving no room for argument, "is to analyze the asset, separate from the baggage. Is the technology viable? Can it be integrated into our systems? Is there a core team of engineers worth keeping? I need you to be a surgeon, Daniel. I need you to cut away the sentiment and give me a cold, hard, strategic recommendation. Can you do that? Or is your judgment compromised?" The question hung in the air. Was it? I thought of all the years of being belittled, of being made to feel small. I thought of the arrogant smirk on Gabrielle's face. A part of me, a dark, petty part, wanted to write a memo that just said, "Let it burn." But then, I thought of the file on my computer. I thought of the elegant, brilliant technology buried under all that hubris. I thought of the 60 employees whose jobs were on the line. And I thought of my 2 little nieces, whose home was now on the line because of their mother's pride. This wasn't about revenge. This was a complex, high-stakes problem. And solving complex, high-stakes problems was the one thing I was unequivocally good at. It was time to prove it, if only to myself. "My judgment is not compromised," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time. "I can do it." "Good," Monica said, a flicker of approval in her eyes. She turned back to her computer, already moving on. "Nate will be in touch to set up the firewall protocols. You will be included on all internal communications as a strategic advisor. You are to offer no opinions unless asked directly by me or by him." "Understood." "Understood." I walked out of her office feeling like I was in a different reality. The world had tilted on its axis. I was now in the bizarre, unprecedented position of secretly masterminding the professional fate of the person whose shadow had defined my entire life. The next few weeks were a descent into a surreal kind of hell. By day, I was buried in the secure data room, a digital vault containing every secret of Bytewave's existence. I sifted through code documentation, employee contracts, and years of board meeting minutes. By night, I was on the family group chat, looking at pictures of my nieces and reading my parents' excited messages about the upcoming Easter trip. The more I dug, the more dire the situation appeared. I found an internal memo from Bytewave's former CFO, sent 3 months before he resigned, warning Gabrielle in stark terms that the company was on a collision course with insolvency. Her response, attached to the email chain, was a single, dismissive sentence. "We need to focus on innovation, not on scarcity." Then I found the thing that truly horrified me. It was a series of UCC lien filings. Legal documents that are public record if you know where to look. I'm not a lawyer, but I know what a lien means. It means you've put something up as collateral. I followed the trail. Gabrielle and her wife, Heather, had taken out a massive second mortgage on their home in Palo Alto. The lender wasn't a bank. It was a private, high-interest hard money lender. The kind of lender that is a last resort before total collapse. She hadn't just bet the company. She had bet everything. Her home, her family's security, my niece's future, the potential for a catastrophic divorce if Heather ever found out the extent of the risk was terrifyingly real. One night, exhausted and emotionally drained, I was on the phone with Rebecca. "I don't know if I can do this, Beck," I confessed, rubbing my temples. "The pressure is insane. If I get this wrong, she loses everything. And if she'd listened to her CFO, she wouldn't be in this position," Rebecca countered, her voice calm and steady as always. "This isn't your fault, Daniel. You're not the cause of the disease. You're the surgeon who has to decide if the patient can be saved. Just do your job. Analyze the data. Make the call. That's all you can do." She was right. I had to disconnect emotionally. I had to focus on the one thing I could control, the strategy. Just as I hung up, a notification popped up on my phone. It was from the family group chat. My dad had just posted a photo of Gabrielle from a few years ago, accepting an award. The caption read, "So proud of our brilliant daughter. Can't wait to celebrate all her success at Easter." I stared at the phone, the cheerful message a stark, sickening contrast to the grim reality spread across my computer screen. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here, and it was about to make landfall in Denver. The weeks leading up to Easter felt like living in two separate, warring realities. Reality one was my day job, a sterile, high-stakes world of encrypted data rooms, confidential conference calls, and the relentless pressure of a multi-million-dollar deal. Reality two was my family life, a cheerful, oblivious world of group chats filled with exclamation points and plans for an Easter egg hunt. The whiplash was giving me a permanent headache. My entire focus at work narrowed to a single critical task: building the perfect strategy. I had to convince Monica and the board that there was a valuable asset hidden inside the burning building of ByteWave, and that I knew exactly how to extract it. The biggest obstacle wasn't financial. It was cultural. It was a man named Marcus Chun, our formidable head of technical integration. Marcus was a Silicon Valley legend, a no-nonsense engineer who had seen dozens of flashy startups like ByteWave crash and burn. He believed that acquiring a company with a toxic founder culture was like deliberately infecting yourself with a disease. "I've read the file, Daniel," he said to me in a rare, direct conversation Monica had permitted. "The tech is impressive on paper, but the company is a personality cult built around your sister. The moment we take over, the key talent, the only thing of real value here, is going to walk out the door. They're loyal to her, not to the code. We'll be left with a $42 million piece of software and nobody who knows how to run it." He was right. That was the conventional wisdom. But I had spent over 100 hours in their data room, and I had found a flaw in that logic. I hadn't just read their financial statements. I had read their internal Slack channels. I had read the bug reports filed by frustrated engineers. I saw a team that was passionate and brilliant, but also deeply demoralized by chaotic leadership and the constant fear of the company folding. They weren't loyal to Gabrielle. They were hostages to her vision. Their payroll had been late. Their stock options were worthless. They weren't cult members. They were prisoners waiting to be liberated. This became the cornerstone of my strategy. I stayed up for 2 straight nights, fueled by coffee and a grim sense of purpose, and I drafted a 20-page strategic memo that I titled The Decapitation and Extraction Strategy. It sounded brutal, and it was. The plan was audacious. We wouldn't just acquire ByteWave. We would perform a corporate surgery. Step 1, the acquisition. We would purchase the company outright, making a public show of celebrating the founder's vision to ensure a smooth transition. Step 2, the decapitation. We would immediately and quietly sideline Gabrielle. My plan proposed offering her a lucrative, 6-month consulting contract with the prestigious-sounding but powerless title of Founder in Residence. She would get a great salary, a press release praising her genius, and an office with a nice view. What she wouldn't get was any authority. No direct reports, no budget, no say in the new direction. She would be a figurehead, a ghost in her own machine, kept on only to prevent her from becoming a disgruntled public critic. Step 3. The extraction. We would identify the core team of 5 engineers who had built the actual technology. We would ring-fence them, creating a new, heavily funded R&D unit within Northbridge, a kind of internal startup. We would give them a new boss, a respected, stable engineering manager from our own ranks, and a clear, exciting technical roadmap. Most importantly, we would give them life-changing retention bonuses and new stock options in Northbridge, real money, not the monopoly money Gabrielle had been paying them in. It was a plan to buy a diamond, throw away the flawed setting, and mount it in a new one of our own design. It was ruthless, precise, and, I was convinced, the only way to make the deal work. I sent the memo to Monica and Nate at 3:15 a.m. on a Wednesday. It was the best work I had ever done. It was my argument for why business administration wasn't just pushing paper. It was architecture. The reaction was swift. Nate called me at 7 a.m. "I just read your memo," he said, his voice buzzing. "I've been doing M&A for 15 years, and this is one of the most elegant and savage strategies I've ever seen. It's a work of art, Daniel. A goddamn work of art." Monica's feedback was more succinct. She called me into her office, the printed-out memo on her desk covered in green ink. "This is a high-risk, high-reward play," she said, her eyes fixed on me. "Marcus is going to fight you on it. He'll say it's too complicated." "Let him," I said. "I can prove him wrong." The fight with Marcus came that afternoon, in a tense, 4-hour video conference. It was Nate, Marcus, Monica, and me, my camera off, my mic muted, a ghost in the war room. "It's too clever by half," Marcus argued, his voice sharp. "You're betting the entire deal on the assumption that these 5 engineers will be grateful little worker bees. What if they're not? What if they see us sidelining their beloved leader and they walk out of pure loyalty? Then we're screwed." This was my moment. I typed furiously in a private chat window to Nate. "Tell him loyalty doesn't pay the mortgage. Their payroll has been late twice. Their stock is worthless. We aren't a threat. We are a rescue mission. We are offering them stability, resources, and a chance for their technology to actually see the light of day. It's not about loyalty. It's about self-preservation." Nate, a master at this, rephrased my points smoothly, making them his own. "Marcus, with respect, we think you're misreading the team's motivation. We believe their primary loyalty is to the work itself, and they're deeply frustrated that it's been stalled. We're not coming in as conquerors. We're coming in as a lifeline." There was a long pause on the call. I could picture Marcus leaning back in his chair, stroking his chin. He was a pragmatist. He respected data. "Okay," he said finally, a note of concession in his voice. "The lifeline angle is interesting. It's a gamble. But if you structure the retention bonuses right, it might just work." We had him. The internal battle was won. My strategy was approved. While Nate's team moved forward to finalize the deal based on my blueprint, my family's excitement about Easter reached a fever pitch. The group chat was a constant stream of cheerful inanity. "Mom, Gabrielle, darling, I found the most wonderful artisanal cheese shop. I'll bring some for an appetizer. We must celebrate your incredible success." "Dad, don't forget the good camera, Margaret. We need a photo of our brilliant daughters together." What a team. I would read these messages at my desk at 1 in the morning, the harsh glow of my monitor reflecting in my eyes, the details of my sister's imminent professional demise spread across the screen. The irony was a physical weight. They were planning a victory party for a battle my sister had already lost, celebrating a rescue mission that they didn't even know was happening, led by the son they had always considered an afterthought. The night before I flew to Denver, Rebecca found me staring out our apartment window, just watching the city lights. "You're carrying the weight of all of this?" she said softly, coming up behind me and wrapping her arms around my waist. "It's not fair. The deal is going to go through." I told her, my voice flat. "My plan worked. They're going to announce it a week after Easter. She's going to be hailed as a genius. She'll get a golden parachute, and everyone will praise her for landing a $42 million deal. And you, I'll be the guy who made the roast chicken," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. She rested her chin on my shoulder. Maybe, but you'll know the truth. Monica knows the truth. Nate knows the truth. And I know the truth. Sometimes that has to be enough. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as I sat on that plane the next day, flying toward a family reunion that felt more like a collision course, I couldn't shake a cold, unsettling feeling. After a lifetime of being erased, was I really okay with letting her sign her name to my masterpiece? My grandmother's house on Easter Sunday was a stage set for a play I'd seen 100 times. The script was memorized by everyone, the roles perfectly cast. My mother, Margaret, was the effusive stage manager, fluttering about ensuring every glass was filled, every guest was comfortable. My father, Thomas, was the proud producer, holding court by the fireplace, regaling my uncle with a story about Gabrielle's award-winning science fair project from the 10th grade. And at the center of the stage, the star of the show, Gabrielle. She was luminous, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored dress that probably cost a fortune. She radiated success. She moved through the crowded living room with the easy confidence of a conquering hero returning to her cheering subjects, accepting their praise with a practiced, humble smile. But I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She was performing the role of her life. I, of course, was backstage, in the kitchen. My role was chief cook and bottle washer. I was carving the two perfect, golden brown roasted chickens I'd woken up at dawn to prepare. My friend Nate, the deal maker, was leaning against the counter, nursing a beer. I'd invited him, telling my family he was a friend from work who had nowhere to go for the holiday. It was a lie of omission. I needed an anchor to reality. I needed one person in that house who knew the real story, just so I could be sure I wasn't the one going crazy. Nate, ever the consummate professional, was a model guest, charming, polite, and quietly observant. Eventually, my mother herded everyone to the long oak dining table, the one my grandfather, a man who had worked with his hands, had built 60 years ago. The table groaned under the weight of a classic Midwestern feast. My chickens, a huge bowl of creamy mashed potatoes, green bean casserole with crispy onions, my mom's legendary dinner rolls. It was a perfect portrait of American family harmony. A complete and utter lie. The small talk was excruciating. After the initial pleasantries, my uncle turned his attention to the guest of honor. "So, Gabrielle," he said, his voice booming, "your father tells us there's some big news brewing over at Bitewave." Gabrielle took a theatrical, delicate sip of her expensive Napa wine. "There is," she said, her voice a carefully calibrated blend of modesty and excitement. "It's been an absolute whirlwind, to be honest. We've been in very quiet, very strategic talks with Northbridge Systems for a few months now. They're a giant, as you know. They saw the incredible potential in our AI platform and, well, they made an offer we simply couldn't refuse." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation build. Then she dropped the bomb. $42 million. The intended effect was achieved. A collective gasp went around the table. My aunt dropped her fork. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, my baby girl," she cried, reaching across the table to squeeze Gabrielle's hand. "I always knew it. I always knew you were destined for such incredible things." My father beamed, his face flushed with pride. He looked like he was about to burst. "That's my daughter," he declared to the room. "Building a company from the ground up and selling it for a fortune. That takes a kind of vision most people can only dream of." I said nothing. I just focused on cutting a piece of chicken on my plate. Each motion of the knife felt deliberate and loud in my own ears. I could feel Nate's gaze on me from across the table. It wasn't a look of pity, I realized. It was a look of profound, sympathetic understanding. And then it happened. The moment the entire day had been building towards. The moment that would either cement my invisibility forever or shatter the whole illusion. My mother, still misty-eyed, turned her beaming face to me. "Oh, Daniel, isn't it just wonderful? Your sister is a bona fide genius." And that's when Gabrielle, drunk on the adoration and her own mythology, made her fatal error. She looked directly at me, a condescending smirk playing on her lips, and delivered the punchline she thought was so clever. "It's okay, Mom. It's very complex, high-level stuff. Daniel's more on the business administration side of things. He wouldn't really be involved in the technical strategy. Real tech needs real brains." She added, as an afterthought, "No offense, Danny." The silence that followed was immediate and total. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the cringing, awkward quiet that follows a comment so breathtakingly arrogant it sucks the air out of the room. Every head turned toward me, expecting the usual response. A tight, forced smile, a self-deprecating shrug, the silent acceptance of my role as the family's good-natured simpleton. But this time I didn't give it to them. I just held my sister's gaze. I didn't say a word. I let her insult hang in the air, a toxic cloud over the festive table. I let everyone feel its weight. And then my grandmother acted. Edna, who had been watching the entire exchange with the quiet intensity of a hawk, placed her fork and knife down on her plate with a soft but decisive click. The sound cut through the tension like a judge's gavel. "Gabrielle," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of the entire room. "You speak so much about real brains. But my understanding is that Bitewave was burning through money so fast it was about to become a smoking hole in the ground. I'm told it had to be sold, as a matter of survival. What kind of brains does that take?" The color drained from Gabrielle's face. She looked like she had been physically struck. "Grandma, that's not accurate," she stammered. "It was a strategic pivot." "Was it?" Edna pressed, her gaze unyielding. My father, flustered and angry at this challenge to the family narrative, jumped to Gabrielle's defense. "Now, Mother, you don't understand the complexities of Silicon Valley. Gabrielle is a visionary." He then rounded on me, his frustration finding its usual target. "And you? Don't you sit there with that smug look on your face. You should be bursting with pride for your sister, not sitting there in jealous silence. What would you know about any of this? What would you know about what it takes to build something of value?" And that was it. The dam broke. 30 years of swallowed anger, of biting my tongue, of accepting my place in the background. It all came rushing out. Not in a yell, but in a low, shaking voice that was somehow more powerful. "Yes, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I met his furious gaze. "I do." Gabrielle let out a short, nervous laugh. "Oh, please, Daniel. You push paper for a living. Let's be real." "That paper I push," I said, my voice gaining strength with every word, "is called a strategic acquisition plan. It's the plan that is currently saving your company. It's the plan that is saving your house from foreclosure." The word house landed like a grenade in the center of the table. I saw a flicker of pure terror in Gabrielle's eyes. Across from her, her wife Heather's face went white, her eyes darting between me and Gabrielle, a look of utter confusion and dawning dread. "You're a liar," Gabrielle hissed, her voice thin and desperate. "You're making all of this up because you've always been jealous of me." "Am I?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "Am I making up the fact that you delayed payroll in both February and April? Am I making up the fact that you took out a high-interest second mortgage on your family home on March 12th from a hard money lender called Veritas Capital? Am I making up the fact that your top 5 engineers were on the verge of quitting? And am I making up the fact that the entire strategy to acquire your company, salvage the core technology, and give you a soft landing with a 6-month consulting promotion, was authored by me?" The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. No one was breathing. My father stared at me, his mouth agape. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. Gabrielle was trembling, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She tried one last, desperate gambit. "He's lying!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He's trying to steal my success." And that's when the final, irrefutable blow was delivered. Not by me, but by the polite, quiet man who had been a model guest all afternoon. Nate Johnson cleared his throat gently. He looked deeply uncomfortable, but his voice, when he spoke, was the epitome of calm professionalism. "Mr. Walsh," he said, addressing my father respectfully. "Mrs. Walsh, please forgive me for intruding on a family matter. My name is Nate Johnson. I'm a vice president at Northbridge Systems." He let his title hang in the air for a moment. "I was the lead negotiator for the ByteWave acquisition. My team and I have spent the last month executing this deal. And I can confirm," he said, his eyes briefly meeting mine with a look of resolute support, "that every single word Daniel has just spoken is the absolute, unvarnished truth. His strategic analysis was the foundation of this entire deal. Without his plan, I can assure you, Northbridge would have walked away. There would be no deal. There would be no $42 million. Nate delivered the words with the dispassionate precision of a lawyer reading a verdict. There was no malice in his tone, no triumph. It was simply a statement of fact. And it was the sound of a 30-year-old lie being utterly and completely demolished. The silence that followed Nate's declaration was not empty. It was filled with the wreckage of our family's central myth. It was a dense, heavy, and deeply uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by my mother's ragged, watery gasps for air. Everyone was frozen, trapped in a tableau of shock and disbelief. The first person to move was Gabrielle. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply pushed her chair back from the table with a violent screech that echoed the turmoil in the room. Her face was a blank mask of humiliation. With a final, venomous glare in my direction, she turned and fled. Not just from the dining room, but out the front door, which she slammed with a force that rattled the windows and my soul. The slam was a full stop. The end of the play. Heather, her wife, looked utterly lost. Her eyes, wide with confusion and a dawning, sickening understanding, darted from my face to Gabrielle's empty chair. She mumbled a choked, incoherent apology to no one in particular, then gathered her purse and rushed out the door after her wife, into the cold twilight. My father simply sat there, staring at the space where Gabrielle had been. His face, usually so ruddy and confident, was pale and slack. The gears in his mind were visibly grinding, trying to reconcile a lifetime of belief with the 5 minutes of brutal truth he had just witnessed. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. For the first time I could remember, Thomas Walsh, the man who always had an opinion, was speechless. My mother was weeping openly now. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but the quiet, heartbroken tears of someone who realizes they have been complicit in a great and terrible injustice. I couldn't breathe in that room. The air was too thick with recrimination and shame. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. "Excuse me," I muttered, and walked out to the quiet solitude of the back porch. The cool Denver air was a relief, a shock of sanity against my hot skin. The fury that had been a coiled snake in my gut for decades had finally struck, and now, in its place, was a vast, hollow exhaustion. I had done it. I had spoken the truth. I had won. But it felt absolutely nothing like a victory. I just felt empty. A few minutes later, the screen door creaked open and closed. I braced myself. I expected it to be my grandmother, coming to offer a word of quiet support. Or maybe Nate, coming to do a postmortem on the explosion he'd helped trigger. It was my father. He walked over and stood beside me at the railing, not looking at me, but staring out at the jagged silhouette of the Rocky Mountains against the deepening purple of the sky. For a long time we just stood there, two strangers sharing a porch. The only sounds were the distant chirp of crickets and the faint, mournful whistle of a train. "Was it all true, Daniel?" he finally asked, his voice rough and low, almost a whisper. "Everything you said? About the house? The debt?" "Yes," I said, my own voice flat. He shook his head slowly, a gesture not of denial, but of profound, weary disbelief. "I don't understand. We never knew. She always made it sound so perfect. The articles, the awards." "I know, Dad," I said. "That was the point." He finally turned his head to look at me, and the fading light caught the sheen of moisture in his eyes. I saw no anger there, only a deep, gut-wrenching shame. What I said to you in there, he started, his voice thick with emotion. For years, the way I've treated your work, your life. He couldn't finish the sentence. He, the former professor, the man who had lectured for 40 years, was completely at a loss for words. He just looked at me, his face a canvas of regret. It's okay, Dad, I heard myself say, and the strangest part was, in that moment, I almost meant it. The anger had burned away, and all that was left was a sad, empty space. He gave a single, jerky nod, as if accepting a verdict. He turned and walked back inside without another word, leaving me alone with the vast, quiet darkness. The confrontation that truly mattered, however, didn't happen on that porch. It happened 3 days later. I was back in Denver trying to process the emotional fallout. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. Can we talk? Please. We met at a neutral territory. A sterile, anonymous coffee shop with bland art on the walls and the smell of burnt espresso in the air. It was halfway between my apartment and the corporate housing Northbridge had arranged for her. When she walked in, I was struck by how much smaller she looked. Stripped of her armor of arrogance and success, she wasn't a tech titan. She was just a tired, frightened woman in an expensive sweater. She sat down opposite me and didn't touch the coffee she'd bought. She just stared at it. I hate you, she said, her voice flat and brittle. It wasn't a cry of anger. It was a simple statement of fact. I know, I replied quietly. You wanted to humiliate me, she continued, her eyes still fixed on her cup. You planned it, bringing your friend from work. You wanted to destroy me in front of everyone. No, I didn't, I said, and I looked her straight in the eye, forcing her to meet my gaze. I didn't want to do any of it, Gabrielle. But for my entire life, you and Mom and Dad have put me in a position where I had to choose between your feelings and my own self-respect. I am done choosing yours. That's what Easter was about. It was the end of me choosing your pride over my truth. She flinched, a small, involuntary movement. But she didn't argue. She knew it was true. Heather, she packed a bag that night, she whispered. The words so quiet I had to lean in to hear them. She said she didn't know who I was anymore. She didn't know about the second mortgage, the real depth of the debt. She said she couldn't live with a liar. Her voice cracked on the last word. The idea of a divorce, it was real. We had to talk to a lawyer just to figure out our options. She only agreed to stay, to try. After I promised her I would tell her the truth about everything. From now on, it was a raw, painful confession, and it was the beginning of honesty. Why did you do it, Danny? She asked, finally looking up at me. Her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a desperate, genuine confusion. Why did you push for the deal? Why did you write that whole plan? You knew everything. You could have just told your boss it was a bad investment and let me crash and burn. Why didn't you? And there it was, the question that had been hanging between us, unspoken, for weeks. I took a slow sip of my coffee. A few reasons, I said, choosing my words carefully. First, because the core technology was brilliant. It deserved to exist. Second, because 60 people and their families depended on that company for their livelihood, and they didn't deserve to lose their jobs because of your pride. And third, I paused. Third, because underneath all the bullshit, you're still my sister, and I didn't want to see you lose your house. I didn't want to see my nieces become homeless. I leaned forward. Don't misunderstand me. I didn't do it to save you. I did it because it was the right, logical, and ethical thing to do for my company and for the people involved. It was a business decision. You just happened to be a beneficiary of it. The power dynamic between us had been fundamentally and permanently altered. It wasn't about my job title or her newfound humility. It was about the truth. The truth was the new foundation. The board officially approved your consulting contract this morning, I told her as I got ready to leave. It's a 6-month term. The salary is more than fair. There's a chance. A chance to figure out who you are without the CEO title. She just nodded, unable to speak, and stared down at her cold coffee. As I walked out of that coffee shop and into the bright, clear Denver sunshine, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for 30 years. The storm was over. The ground was littered with debris, but the air was finally, blessedly, clear. The 6 months that followed the Easter detonation were not a period of dramatic, Hollywood-style healing. There were no tearful group hugs, no sudden epiphanies. Instead, it was a quiet, painstaking process of rebuilding. It was like watching a forest slowly recover after a fire, new green shoots tentatively pushing up through the scorched earth. The most immediate and visible change was at work. Gabrielle, in her new role as a founder-in-residence, was a shadow of her former self. For the first few weeks, she was a ghost in the office, attending meetings but rarely speaking, her contributions limited to terse, insightful comments in a shared document. The swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful caution. I witnessed the first real sign of change in a project meeting about 3 months in. The new R&D unit, built around her former core engineering team, was wrestling with a complex integration problem. A brilliant but painfully shy young engineer named Victor Ramirez, who was only a few years out of college, was presenting a potential solution. His idea was elegant, but it involved completely scrapping a foundational piece of architecture that Gabrielle herself had designed years ago. In the old days, Gabrielle would have eviscerated him. She would have seen it as a personal attack on her genius and would have cut him down with a series of condescending technical questions until he retreated in humiliated silence. The old Gabrielle was gone. The new Gabrielle listened to his entire presentation without interruption. When he finished, a nervous sweat beading on his forehead, there was a long, tense silence in the room. Everyone was looking at her, waiting for the explosion. It never came. "That's a radical departure from my original concept, Victor," she said, her voice calm and even. "I have about 5 immediate objections based on potential scalability issues." She then, one by one, listed them out not as attacks but as problems to be solved. "However," she concluded, looking directly at the young engineer, "your approach to data processing is more efficient. I'll admit I hadn't considered that. Walk me and the team through your logic on the scalability question. Convince me I'm wrong." The collective exhale in the room was almost audible. Victor, stunned but emboldened, launched into a passionate defense of his idea. It was a real debate, a collaboration. Gabrielle wasn't defending her ego. She was stress-testing an idea to make it better. She was acting like an engineer, not a queen. That night, an email from her landed in my inbox. The subject was simple, "Thanks." The message was even simpler. "I saw the final numbers on the retention packages you structured for the team. They were more than fair. More than I could have ever offered them. Thanks for looking out for them." That was it. It was the closest she had ever come to admitting I had done something she couldn't. It was a small step, but it was on solid ground. The changes within the family were even slower and more awkward. For the first month, my parents and I communicated through a series of terse, logistical texts. The wounds were too raw for a real conversation. The family group chat lay dormant, a digital graveyard of happier, more oblivious times. The first crack in the ice came from my father. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text from him. It wasn't a question or a greeting. It was just a link to a long article from the Wall Street Journal about corporate debt restructuring and its impact on the tech sector. Below the link was a single 7-word message. "Saw this article and thought of you." It was a clumsy, fumbling attempt at connection, but it was more meaningful than 1,000 hollow compliments about Gabrielle's genius. It was the first time in my life he had ever acknowledged my world, my expertise. It was an admission. It was an olive branch. I texted back, "Thanks, Dad. It's a good analysis. The part about leveraged buyouts is particularly relevant right now." A week later, he called me. Not texted. Called. "Daniel," he said, his voice hesitant, a stark contrast to his usual booming confidence. "It's your father. I was reading that article again. This part about leveraged buyouts. I have to admit, I don't really understand the mechanics. Do you have a minute? I was hoping you could explain it to me." I leaned back in my chair, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across my face. It was happening. After 35 years, my father was asking for my help, acknowledging my knowledge. "Sure, Dad," I said, my voice warm. "I've got time." I spent the next half an hour walking him through the basics of corporate finance. He listened patiently, asking sharp, insightful questions. He was the professor again, but this time he was the student. It was one of the best conversations we'd ever had. My mother's path to reconciliation was more indirect. She began calling Rebecca once a week, ostensibly to check in on her. She'd ask about her stressful job at the hospital, and then, ever so casually, she would pivot. "So, Daniel must be terribly busy at work. That new project of his sounds so important. I do hope he's taking care of himself." She was trying to build a bridge, but she was too ashamed and embarrassed to walk across it herself. Rebecca, with her infinite grace, played along. "He's doing great, Margaret," she'd say. "But, you should really ask him yourself. I know he'd love to tell you all about it." The new family dynamic finally coalesced around Gabrielle's future. Her 6-month consulting contract was nearing its end. The executive team at Northbridge, including a now-converted Marcus Chen, had been incredibly impressed with her technical contributions. Freed from the burden of running a company, she was a pure, high-octane innovator. Monica called me into her office. "We want to keep her," she said bluntly. "We want to offer her a full-time position. Not as a manager. God, no. We want her as a principal engineer, working on next-generation problems. It's a step down in title, but it's where she can provide the most value. What do you think?" "I think it's the job she was born to do," I said without hesitation. Gabrielle accepted the offer. A few weeks later, she and I were in the company cafeteria, grabbing coffee before a major project review. It was becoming a ritual for us. Our conversations were mostly about work, a safe, neutral ground. But the old tension was gone, replaced by a comfortable, professional respect. "You know," she said, stirring her latte and looking at me with a wry, self-aware smile. "Dad tried to explain your job to me the other day. He used the phrase, synergistic leverage, 3 times. I'm pretty sure he thinks it's a type of yoga." I let out a real, unforced laugh. "He asked me about that. I think he's subscribed to the Wall Street Journal now. He's trying." "He is," she said, her smile fading into something more thoughtful. "I think for so long, he poured all his own unfulfilled ambitions into me. All the things he wished he had been. And I think I spent just as long projecting all my insecurities onto you." She looked up from her coffee, her gaze clear and direct. "It was lazy and it was cruel. I'm sorry, Daniel." It wasn't a dramatic apology. There were no tears. It was quiet, simple, and honest. It was the sound of the last broken piece clicking into a new, healthier place. "I know," I said. "It's okay." The golden child and the scapegoat had finally retired. In their place were just a brother and a sister figuring it out. It's been over a year now since the great Easter Sunday reckoning. Sometimes it feels like it happened a lifetime ago in a different family to a different version of me. The story of what my friend Jason lovingly calls the Walsh family implosion has settled from a traumatic event into a quiet, foundational piece of our new history. The $42 million acquisition, once a source of such turmoil, is now taught as a case study in my company's management training program. It's held up as a model of how to successfully acquire and integrate a technology asset while restructuring the leadership. The drone logistics division, built on the back of ByteWave's technology, is one of Northbridge's fastest-growing and most profitable units, a unit that, in the last quarterly review, I was promoted to lead. The new promotion came with a salary and stock options that were once beyond my wildest dreams. But the real compensation wasn't on the pay stub. It was in the quiet, daily reality of being respected for my competence. It was in Monica Reyes asking for my opinion and actually listening to the answer. It was in Marcus Chun calling me to partner on a new project, saying, "I need your brain on this." My relationship with my family has found its new normal. It's not a fairy tale. It's not perfect. There are still occasional moments of awkwardness, the faint, ghostly echoes of old dynamics. but it's built on truth, not on a shared delusion. My dad sends me articles from business journals, and our calls are now debates about market trends and corporate strategy. He boasts to his retired professor friends about his son, the business whiz. My mother, for her part, now proudly tells her book club that I'm a key executive at a major tech firm. She sees me now, not as an appendage to my sister, but as me. Gabrielle is, by all accounts, happier than I have ever seen her. Freed from the crushing, self-imposed pressure of being a CEO, she is a force of nature as a principal engineer. She's like a world-class artist who has finally been given the best paints and a limitless canvas. She's leading a new R&D project now, something even more ambitious than her first vision model. Last week, she presented her initial proposal to me and the executive team. It was breathtakingly brilliant. When I approved her initial budget without hesitation, she caught my eye from across the polished boardroom table and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a look of pure, professional gratitude. It was all that needed to be said between us. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in my office late at night, the city lights of Denver spread out before me like a carpet of fallen stars. I think about what I was searching for all those years. For so long, I thought I was desperate for my family's approval. I thought I wanted their applause, their recognition. I spent decades measuring my own self-worth against their deeply flawed and biased scale. But I was wrong. It was never about their approval. What I really wanted was respect. First and foremost, from myself. And the most crucial lesson I learned is that you cannot get self-respect by outsourcing it. You can't have it delegated or granted to you. You have to earn it. You earn it by doing your job with integrity, by being scrupulously ethical when no one is watching, by choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. You earn it by knowing your own value with such certainty that it becomes an unshakable core, immune to the opinions of others. The great irony is that the moment I stopped needing their validation was the moment I finally got it. My family didn't give me my value. They just finally, after 35 years, learned to see the value that had been there all along. And the best part? The best part is that I no longer need them to. My sense of worth is my own. It's not up for negotiation. And it's the most valuable asset I will ever possess. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family or at your job? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.